The heat coming off the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews was enough to melt rubber, but the tension inside our SUV was even hotter. My father, Colonel Rhett Bull Miller, a man who believed his 30 years of service gave him the right to command the weather, was currently lecturing the young airman manning the gate. He was leaning out the window, waving his blue retiree ID card like it was a golden ticket, completely ignoring the line of cars piling up behind us. He gestured a thumb back toward me, his voice dripping with that familiar casual disdain. "She's just a civilian," he barked, not even looking at me to check my reaction. "Just tagging along on my pass today, son, so don't worry about her." I didn't say a word to correct him. I just leaned forward from the shadows of the passenger seat and silently slid a thin, unassuming hard card across the scanner. It wasn't the standard military issue, it was black, nondescript, and to those who knew what to look for, terrifyingly powerful. The machine let out a distinctive heavy beep-beep chime that cut through the noise of the idling engine. The young guard glanced at the screen, and the color drained from his face instantly. He didn't just straighten up, he practically vibrated with panic as he snatched the red crash phone off the wall. "Control, we have a Code 1 asset at Gate 4, he shouted, his voice cracking. "Repeat, Code 1, clear the lane immediately." My father froze mid-sentence, his precious retirement card dangling uselessly in his hand as he stared at the guard, and then slowly turned back to look at me. My father had spent 3 decades in the Air Force worshipping the chain of command like a religion. To him, rank was the only currency that mattered, and in his eyes his retired status made him a god walking among mortals. He thought he was bringing his aimless civilian daughter along to witness his glory, to see how the big boys played. He had absolutely no idea that while he was busy reliving his glory days, I was the one, actively deciding who got to land on that runway, and who got turned away at the gate. The humiliation had started exactly 48 hours earlier, at a dinner that felt more like a tactical briefing than a family meal. Dad had slammed a heavy envelope onto the table, rattling the silverware. He announced he had pulled some strings with his old contacts to get us into the very important persons section for the presidential arrival ceremony. I tried to keep my face neutral, staring at the roast chicken like it was the most interesting thing in the room. He wasn't inviting me because he wanted my company, he was inviting me because he thought I needed saving from my own life. "You need to come, Sarah," he said, cutting his meat with aggressive precision. "You can meet some real men there. Officers. Men with actual careers, not this little event planning thing you're doing in DC. Our neighbor was eating with us, and he chuckled along, buying into the narrative that I was just a drifting failure. Dad leaned in, performing for his audience. "It's basically glorified party planning, isn't it?" He laughed, waving his fork at me. "She worries about balloons and napkins, while adults worry about national security." I felt that familiar burn in my chest, the memory of missed holidays, the classified briefings I couldn't talk about, the security clearances that would make his head spin. "Actually, Dad," I started, trying to keep my voice steady, "I have work that day. I can't just take off." That was the wrong thing to say. The jovial mask dropped, replaced by the colonel's scowl. He slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "I am a colonel, Sarah," he snapped, his voice dropping to a growl. "I pull the strings in this town. You don't have work that is more important than the commander-in-chief landing. You just show up, dress respectfully, and try not to embarrass me with that civilian attitude for once." I looked at him, and I realized there was no point in arguing. He wanted a show? Fine. I would give him the best seat in the house for the truth. The morning of the presidential arrival ceremony didn't begin with excitement, it began with a tactical inspection of my appearance that felt more like a dressing down. My father was pacing the living room, nervously polishing a metal that hadn't seen active duty in 15 years, while simultaneously lecturing me on the art of invisibility. He treated the upcoming event not as a public gathering, but as a holy pilgrimage, where I was the unwashed heathen who needed to be taught how to kneel. "You need to pull your hair back tighter, Sarah," he muttered, aggressively, buffing the brass on his lapel without making eye contact. "And for God's sake, don't speak to anyone unless they speak to you first. These are serious men with serious responsibilities, not the caterers you're used to dealing with." He looked at my navy blazer and tailored slacks with a profound, disappointed sigh. The same sigh I'd heard when I chose college over the academy, and again when I took my current job in D.C. To him, my corporate attire was a costume of weakness, a visual reminder of his failure to raise a soldier. He saw a girl who played with spreadsheets. He had no idea he was looking at the White House director of advance. In his narrative, I was a glorified party planner worrying about balloon arches and napkin colors. He couldn't fathom that while he was fretting about finding a parking spot, I was mentally running through the Blue Goose protocol for Air Force One's touchdown. My internal reality was a sharp, vibrating contrast to his dismissal. While he lectured me on how to address a general, my mind was occupied with the logistical chessboard of the airfield. I wasn't worried about etiquette. I was worried about the hard stand, the reinforced concrete pad required to support the weight of the beastly 747. I was thinking about the secure enclave, the sterile zone I had personally designed on the satellite maps 3 weeks ago to ensure no unauthorized personnel could get within 400 yards of the football, the nuclear launch briefcase that never left the president's side. Every time Dad told me to try to keep up, I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from reciting the motorcade alignment I had approved the night before. I checked my phone, shielding the screen from Dad's prying eyes as if I were hiding a text from a boyfriend rather than a national security update. A message popped up from Agent Vance, the Secret Service detail leader, a man made of granite and vigilance who I'd spent more time with in the last month than my own family. Obstruction on the secondary egress route, Vance wrote, efficiently and without panic. Local PD is towing a civilian vehicle now. I typed back a quick, decisive reply. Copy that. Hold the package at the hold point until I give the green. I don't want the wheels down until that lane is clear, Vance replied instantly. Understood, Director. We wait for your call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a secret weight of authority that my father couldn't see. Are you texting your friends? Dad asked, his voice dripping with irritation as he grabbed his keys. Put that away. We are going to a military installation, Sarah, not a brunch. You need to focus. I nodded silently, adding this moment to the mental ledger I'd been keeping since childhood. Another entry where my competence was mistaken for distraction, where my actual power was misread as apathy. I walked out to the car, letting him believe he was the commander of this expedition, even though I was the one who had literally written the script for the day's events. The drive to the base was suffocating, the air inside the SUV thick with Dad's projected insecurity. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, terrified that his retired credentials wouldn't command the respect they used to. Now listen, he said, his voice tight and breathless. When we get there, we might have to park far away. Just walk fast and don't complain. And if you see a general, you stand up straight. These people have clearances you can't even imagine. He looked at me then, a mixture of pity and frustration in his eyes, assuming I was completely out of my depth. I almost laughed, a hysterical bubble rising in my throat that I had to forcefully swallow. Clearances I couldn't imagine? I wanted to tell him that I was the one who processed the access lists. I wanted to tell him that the generals he worshipped were currently reading a briefing packet with my signature at the bottom. But I stayed silent, watching the airfield perimeter come into view, knowing that the collision between his world and mine was only minutes away. He was worried about getting a good view. I was worried about the crosswind component for Air Force One. We were in the same car but living on different planets. The approach to Joint Base Andrews looked less like a military installation and more like a gridlocked parking lot. Brake lights stretched out in a suffocating red river as far as the eye could see, heat waves radiating off the asphalt in the midday sun. Dad, however, was convinced he had the tactical advantage. He swerved our SUV into the far right lane marked Retired Military, insisting it was a command decision that would slice 20 minutes off our arrival time. But just like his understanding of my life, his intel was woefully outdated. The lane was a trap, hopelessly clogged with hundreds of other retirees who had the exact same idea, all inching forward at a glacial pace while Dad muttered creative curses at the dashboard. I watched the digital clock on the console tick away, knowing the president's arrival window was tightening by the second. I decided to offer him a lifeline, albeit a gentle one, trying to navigate his ego like it was a minefield. "Dad," I said softly, keeping my voice neutral as I pointed toward a turnoff ahead that looked deceptively empty. Gate 4 is usually designated for operational personnel and priority access. We should probably check the signage before we commit to this lane. It was a hint, a massive flashing neon hint, dropped by the person who had literally approved the traffic control plan for this entire event. He didn't even look at where I was pointing, he just tightened his grip on the wheel until his knuckles turned the color of bone. "I think I know how to read a base map, Sarah," he snapped, his voice sharp with the specific condescension he reserved exclusively for me. "I was stationed here before you were born. I don't need navigation advice from someone whose biggest professional crisis is running out of ice." I sat back, the familiar sting of his dismissal washing over me. It was the same tone he used when I graduated, the same tone when I got my first clearance. The sound of a door slamming in my face. "Fine," I thought. "If you want to lead, then lead." As we crawled forward, the sign for Gate 4 finally came into clear view, looming over the road like a warning shot. It wasn't just a standard gate. The placard was marked with a thick, aggressive red stripe and the words "Restricted Access. Mission Essential Only." My heart did a little jump. I knew that stripe. I knew it because I was the one who designated it. That wasn't just a side entrance. It was the sterile corridor for the Secret Service, the White House staff, and the motorcade itself. Dad was driving a civilian vehicle straight into the most heavily guarded choke point on the eastern seaboard, armed with nothing but a 20-year-old ID card and a bad attitude. I slid my phone out of my pocket, keeping it low below the window line. I pulled up my secure thread with Agent Vance and typed a quick, precise update, "Coming in hot at Gate 4. Civilian escort my dad. He's going to try to pull rank. Stand by." 3 seconds later, the phone buzzed against my palm. Vance replied with a single skull emoji followed by 2 words, "Popcorn ready." A small, cold smile touched my lips as I watched Dad wipe sweat from his forehead, completely oblivious to the buzzsaw he was about to walk into. He wanted to show me how the big dogs operate, so I decided to let him walk right into the kennel. We pulled up to the guard shack with the aggressive momentum of a man who believes traffic laws are merely suggestions for the enlisted. The heavy steel bollards blocking the lane were formidable, but my father seemed to think his personality alone was enough to lower them. A young, serious airman stepped out of the booth, his hand raised in a sharp halt motion that made my father scowl. Dad rolled down the window, letting the conditioned air escape into the humidity, and flashed his blue retired ID with a practiced flourish, like a magician revealing the prestige. "Colonel Miller, retired," he announced, his voice booming with that specific mixture of entitlement and impatience he reserved for service workers and subordinates. Heading to the very important person tent. "Open the lane, son." The airman didn't flinch. He took the card, scanned it with a handheld device, and frowned at the readout. "Sir," the airman said, his voice flat and professional, "this ID is valid for general base access but not this gate. This is a sterile zone for the presidential motorcade. You need to turn around and use the main gate 3 miles back." The silence that followed lasted exactly 1 second before the explosion. Dad didn't just get angry. He went nuclear. "Turn around?" he sputtered, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "I have more time in the latrine than you have in service. Do you know who I am? I am a colonel in the United States Air Force, and I am not turning this car around for a jumped-up E3. The airman started to speak, glancing nervously at me in the passenger seat, but Dad cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't look at her," he snapped, gesturing at me as if I were a piece of luggage that had fallen over. "She's just with me. Ignore her. Just open the damn gate." "She's just with me." The words hung in the humid air, heavy and suffocating. It was the tagline of my entire existence in his eyes, an appendage, a shadow, never the main event. I looked at him, and something inside me finally snapped, not with a bang, but with a cold, clear click. I opened the car door. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing? Get back inside." Dad shouted, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from a radio in another room. I stepped out onto the asphalt, smoothed the lapel of my blazer, and walked toward the sensor with the posture of someone who owns the building. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my White House Connection hard pass, the Yankee white credential that fewer than 1% of personnel ever see, let alone hold. I held it up to the reader. The machine paused for a microsecond, processing the high-level encryption, and then let out a distinctive authoritative sound, beep-beep chime. The screen on the pillar didn't just blink, it lit up with a bright, pulsating green. The text scrolled across the LED display in block letters, POTUS Advance Lead, Clearance Level 1. The airman's eyes went wide, darting from the screen to my face. The transformation was instantaneous. He didn't just straighten up, he snapped to a rigid position of attention that would have made a drill sergeant weep. "Ma'am," he barked, panic edging into his voice. "Apologies, ma'am, I didn't recognize the vehicle?" Before my father could even process the change in atmosphere, the airman slammed his hand onto the red panic button inside the booth. The massive steel bollard sank into the ground with a heavy, industrial thud. Sirens chirped a short, sharp welcome. Then, the door to the guard shack flew open, and Agent Vance stepped out. He was wearing the full kit, earpiece, sunglasses, the tailored suit that concealed lethal capability. He walked right past my father's window without even glancing at him, marching straight to me. "Director Miller," Vance said, his voice loud enough to carry into the car. "We were getting worried. The beast is staged on the tarmac, but we need your signature on the motorcade alignment before we can move the package." I turned to look at the car. Dad was sitting there, his mouth slightly open, his colonel persona completely evaporated. He looked small. He looked confused. Vance followed my gaze, peering into the driver's side window with the cold, assessing stare of the Secret Service. He looked at my father, then turned back to me, his hand resting casually near his waist. "Is this civilian with you, ma'am?" Vance asked, the word civilian landing like a gavel strike. "Or do we need to detain him for obstructing a federal checkpoint?" The silence was absolute. My father, the man who worshipped rank, was suddenly staring down the barrel of a hierarchy he didn't understand. He looked at me, terrified, waiting for my command. The power dynamic has fully inverted. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting him feel the weight of it. "He's with me," I said calmly, my voice steady and unbreakable. "Mark him as support staff. Give him a visitor badge, and let him through." My father spent my whole life telling me to respect the uniform. He just didn't realize that the people in uniforms take orders from the people in suits. The walk from the checkpoint to the tarmac was perhaps the longest 300 yards of my father's life. For decades, he had been the one setting the pace, the officer strutting at the front of the formation while his family scrambled to keep up in his wake. But today, the geometry of our relationship had been completely redrawn. I walked flanked by Agent Vance and 2 other members of the detail, moving with the purposeful velocity of someone on a mission clock. My father, stripped of his command and his bluster, trailed 10 feet behind us, ushered along by a junior agent like he was a confused tourist who had wandered into a secure zone. He was wearing a generic yellow laminate badge clipped to his shirt pocket. A badge that simply read visitor in bold, humiliating block letters. There was no rank on it, no colonel, no honors. Just a temporary pass for a civilian guest. When we reached the secure holding area, I gestured for him to wait in the very important person tent, a glorified canvas box where the donors and local politicians sat. "Stay here, Dad," I said, my voice steady, lacking the hesitation that used to define my conversations with him. "Don't cross the red line on the pavement. That's the kill zone for the snipers." I didn't wait for his acknowledgement. I turned my back on him and walked straight into the chaos of the operational area. From his vantage point, he had a front row seat to the reality of my life. I knew he was watching me, probably waiting for me to falter or ask for help, but I didn't have time to perform for an audience of one. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and the deafening whine of auxiliary power units. A 2-star general, the base commander, strode across the tarmac toward me. I saw my father stiffen in the tent, his instincts kicking in. He expected me to salute, or perhaps cower. Instead, The general stopped 3 feet from me and waited for me. Cue. Director Miller, the general shouted over the turbine whine. Ground control is asking if you want the press pool moved to the secondary riser before wheels down. I checked my watch and shook my head. Negative, General. Keep them in place. If we move them now, they'll block the egress route for the medical van. Hold the line. The general nodded, accepting the order without hesitation. Copy that, Director. I glanced back at the tent. My father's mouth was slightly open. He wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at a stranger, who commanded the men he had spent his life trying to impress. I remembered all the times he told me I lacked command presence, all the times he said I was too soft for the real world. I wondered if he was tallying those moments now, reconciling the soft girl he raised with the woman directing the movement of the United States military. Then, the main event arrived. The sky rumbled, and the gleaming blue and white silhouette of Air Force One touched down. The precision of the moment was absolute. The stairs rolled out, the Marines snapped to attention, and the door opened. When the president descended, the world seemed to hold its breath. He reached the bottom of the stairs, greeting the base commander, and then he turned directly to me. This wasn't a photo op, it was a functional check-in. He shook my hand, leaning in to speak over the engines. Smooth arrival, Sarah, he said, his smile genuine. Vance tells me you cleared a bottleneck at the gate personally. Good work. I nodded professionally. Thank you, Mr. President. The car is ready. He moved toward the beast, disappearing into the motorcade. He didn't look at the very important person tent. He didn't know Bull Miller existed. In that moment, the legacy my father thought he owned, the proximity to power, dissolved into the heat haze. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of companionship. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a worldview collapsing. The air of superiority that usually filled the car whenever my father drove was gone, replaced by a nervous, vibrating energy. He kept glancing at me, then back at the road, struggling to find a frequency we could both speak on. For 20 minutes, the only sound was the hum of the tires on the beltway. I didn't turn on the radio. I let him sit in it. I let him sit with the realization that his party planner daughter had just orchestrated the movement of the free world's leader while he stood behind a velvet rope. Finally, as we turned onto his street, he cleared his throat, a rough, jagged sound. I didn't know you. He started, then stopped, searching for the right words. He tried to pivot to the only language he knew, logistics. I mean, that Yankee white clearance, that's hard to get. The background check alone takes months. I didn't know they gave that to civilians. It was a compliment, wrapped in a defense mechanism. He was trying to validate me by validating the bureaucracy I navigated, as if the paperwork was more impressive than the person. I pulled into his driveway and put the car in park, but I didn't kill the engine. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the gray in his hair, the uncertainty in his eyes. I saw the man who had made me feel small so he could feel big. It is hard to get, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But they don't give it to civilians. They give it to professionals. He looked down at his hands, nodding slowly. Well, he stammered, your mother made a roast. You should come in. Tell her about the president. I looked at the house, the place where I had learned to apologize for. Taking up space, the place where my dreams were called hobbies. I realized I didn't need to go in. I didn't need to brag to Mom to prove I was worthy. The ledger was closed. I can't, I said. I have a debriefing in an hour. And honestly, Dad, I don't need to tell the story. He looked hurt, but I pressed on, needing to set the stone in the wall. It's a different world now. Competence matters more than rank. I love you, Dad, but don't ever assume I'm just anything ever again. If you want to know who I am, ask. Don't tell me. He sat there for a moment, stunned by the boundary, then quietly opened the door. Okay, he whispered. Okay, Sarah. I watched him walk to the front door, looking older than he had that morning. I put the car in reverse and backed out, slipping my sunglasses on as I turned toward D.C. The sun was setting over the Capitol dome in the distance, painting the sky in brilliant purples and oranges. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, The air didn't feel thin. It felt like mine. My father thought power was something you wear on your collar. I had to teach him that real power is the ability to open the doors that stay locked for everyone else. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most, hit that like button and tell your story in the comments. Welcome to the team.